Sophiatown happened almost by accident. The owner of the farm, Waterval, H. Tobianski, planned a private leasehold township for low-income whites. He named the area after his wife, Sophia. But he failed to attract buyers to the area, or white buyers anyway. Sophiatown became an area where black people could buy land, and they did, alongside Chinese, Coloureds, and Indians. As white people marched to the polls to vote for apartheid, a truly non-racial society was born. It could not last. In February 1955, trucks rolled into its exuberant center, loaded its population, and removed them to meadowlands. Shortly after that, the area was razed to the ground. In its place came triumph, victory. The sterile, clean streets that emerged from the rubble was indeed a triumph for white rule. Sophiatown's spirit was broken. Its people were dispersed. But today, in an era which perhaps strives to regain the free, non-racial character that was Sophiatown, some people believe that Sophiatown is not necessarily dead. The name, at least, will be restored. Bringing back the name Sophiatown might well restore some of the dignity that was stripped away in the past. But it was more than dignity that was lost. It was a way of life.
Dumelang re la amogela mo Daily Thetha on SABC 1. Nakadina ke Tumelo. Setlogolo sa mathomo sa Mothotoane. It's always a pleasure joining you, of course, every Monday to Thursday ka 11 a.m. Gona mo gae mo SABC 1. La tseba gore re baswa. We are the youth and we are taking charge. I'm sure the insight Eli Boninge has set this tone. Yeah, topic eleng gore go discuss le khonule, and it's the much ever spoken about, topic in South Africa, which is with regards to land. Eleng gore batho ba leng gore ba batsho in South Africa feel for we need our land back. But the question is, how do we get it back?
Kamanam Kini Shandu, Sinmungele with Daily Thetha on SABC 1, hashtag Be New with 1. Job Seshilo Utum is Kuluma about the land issue Namslanje. Spunugwas, Gutubona Guakon, Utinubonok about this. And just quickly, a brief one. Which currently 80% of Bantabamyama controller only 15% of the land. Kuzoti 8% population of Bantabam Shope. Bonabatata Wonke low 70%. Enyagisi Salang Mafem, Nama companies, Ganjalo. So when I find out exactly Job Bonilla before 48 to Bantabam Banning. Basu so endaweni zabo ngangemthetho ukuthi kumele bebuyisele nemihlaba yabo or no laba sebephethe njengamanje kumele bebe willing ukuthi bayidayisa lo mhlaba and bebe willing futhi nalabanye ukuthi bayithenga lo mhlaba because njengoba sibona ukwenzakala nje we want to find out more about that nanokuthi if abantu abamnyama sebuyisele umhlaba wabo are they ready now?
Yeah, that's the question that we're asking today. The theme, the president, of course, in this year's State of the Nation address, nearly radical economic transformation. And at the heart of that is, of course, the expropriation of land back to its rightful owners. The statistics are really scary in terms of who owns the wealth, who owns the means of production in South Africa, and the majority, it is white South Africans. So, but how do we actually get the land back to us? Is it a willing buyer and willing seller situation, or we just need to expropriate without any compensation? But I feel like there's also been various articles are black South Africans also ready to get their land back, or Zimbabwe skills, and black South Africans argue to say no, that is not true, because most or majority of the farmers, of course, are black. So the skills are there. It's a matter of how do we transition and how do we take back the land. But I feel like we have, of course, panel of experts into getting this topic or re-dissect it and actually get to the core. But young people in South Africa are thinking about today's topic.
For 011-339-1315 and number 67 sound njengamanje usithola on Facebook daily_Thetha or on Twitter @daily_Thetha. Sifuna ukuza kuwena ukuthi abelungu kubona ukuthi kumele becompensate ngomhlaba wabo or abantu ababuyisela umhlaba wabo without compensation. That's what we're talking about namhlanje, especially as a youth. We want to find out when uthini umbono wakho about this. Njakutumo saying ukuthi esikhathini esiningi sihlezi compensate comparison kakhulukazi neZimbabwe ukuthi if kwenzakala ngempela sinikeza lama farmer sitting away to or whatever, or whatever the case may be. Are we ready now? We've seen articles amanye as well whereby abantu benikezwa amafama and behluleka kwa manager begcina badayisa back lawo mafama. What's your take at home? That's what we want to find out exactly. And even in the studio as well. So besikhuluma na apha namhlanje the land issue, all things land.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much to everyone for coming. You're welcome. I'm dealing with our, our studio audience members. Let's just give it to the lady right next to you, man, because you're one of our studio audience members. Oh, naga the topic ya land. As a young South African winner, what do you understand about land and what would you like to see the end result about this land discussion?
Okay, my name is Kukuletu Mpuma Etenhauser. Well, firstly, I think that it's unfair that they need to compensate them for the land because it was stolen in the first place. So kufana nokuthi wena jontshe phone and then you expect me to pay to get it back. So I think that it's really not fair. And where I come from, there's this family who just lost 70 cows. And then the farm owners say that there's nothing that they can do because these people did not own land. So I think that people should get back their land. The money that they were going to use to compensate them, they can use the money to buy their own equipment that they're going to need to get that land to be productive and so on.
Do you think, whose responsibility is it, do you think, or to back the land to its rightful owners? Because you did mention, if my phone is stolen, I can't buy that phone back. So who is supposed to mediate in that situation and make sure the land transfer is easier?
Okay, so if I could go there as an individual and say, my forefather used to own this land, they wouldn't take me seriously. So I think this is a case where the state has to intervene and help our people get back their land.
Interesting views.
Cool stuff. Ngithanda kakhulukazi when youth ikwazi ukuthi iziphola about this because esikhathi esiningi when you talk about land issues ngazuthi awukhuluma nabantu abasha because some of them were not there ngaleso sikhathi. But 23 years later, I think this is a topic ngimele ngabe mhlawumbe sesivalile. But however, because of the situation of this country, sisithola against sakita kuyona as well. Sisithini igama lakho and ithini question yakho or a comment about the topic namhlanje.
Okay, sanibonani Kamala Mufikile Mukari. The topic namhlanje is how can the government intervene in this matter?
And when opinion what's your opinion? How do you think our government intervene?
Since a lot of people lost their land, it is the government responsibility to help people who lost their land during the apartheid. Yes.
Do you think it's only do you think it's only the government's responsibility? What about those who know who they took the land?
Exactly. The white people as well. They know because okay, I'm living in emhlabeni kaDumi. Somehow I know ukuthi uDumi nesizulwane sakhe and everything. Where can I trace them back? Or must I do something to trace them back as well? Say, hey, guys, this is a portion of your land, or however the case is distributed.
Okay, since the person who stole the land, they must take in their time to contact and pay them and make sure that the family is well taken of.
Okay. What a nice one as well. I see on Facebook as well, people are talking about this. But encourage Aguti, go on Facebook, load it data because you comment and data. So go on Facebook and on Twitter as well. I see Tumbona about this. I see something from Teresa Drizi King Baloyi. If whites have ideas about creating jobs for us blacks, then why not give them a land to do so? Let us be wise. Okay.
That was a very interesting one, a very different view. Hopefully our panelists will how to dissect that one. But there's another tweet there coming in. He deleted. Alfred. All right. Alfred Makumbeche, or how can you compensate a thief? How can you compensate a thief? So meaning for batshwaleng gore ba tshwere land eo and ha ba ikry ka mmusho ga botse go tla jwang gore o ba fe chelete gore ba o fe land. I think it's a tricky one.
It's a one as well. I think ngikhuluma ngayo ukuthi ngibonile on Facebook someone saying ukuthi buying a land that was stolen, actually buying stolen goods is not it's actually a crime in South Africa. So for us to buy back the land which was stolen, we are committing another crime.
Yeah. Very smart young person, that one. Very smart young person. But daily SABC 1. We've invited, of course, young, dynamic minds to also, of course, dissect this issue. And how can we actually come to a conclusion? We'll be right back.
We as black people, have a different handle to life and understanding of things compared to, white people. In our language, we don't have the word stranger. And in our language, you don't go to war to claim, land or territory. In our language, land belongs to the ancestors. It is kept in the custodianship of the kings, who are nothing without, I hate the word subjects, but the people that they rule over. When people lost power over land through war, some people call it gratuitous violence, through unprovoked violence. How should we go about expropriating the land? First, we need a language for our hunger for land. It's easier for me and you at that horizontal level to agree that, look, there's a hunger for land, it is our land, let's take it. Before we can take the land, because we have a hunger to take the land, and it's our land, rightfully ours, we must cut those ties of legitimacy with the government. We must make our people know that the government in power is not a legitimate force to have authority on us, and therefore they cannot have authority to put us in line when they deem something we do as out of line. You see, what was done to us over hundreds of years has made us the kind of people that we are, people without dignity, people without freedom, people without self-reliance. So the first part of repairing ourselves, because this is what we need to do because of racism, we need to repair ourselves. We can't hope that white people or government or anybody is going to repair ourselves. So when we get the land, the first thing it would be the first place to start at in order to repair ourselves. And like I said, Frans Fanon says 3 things come from land. It's freedom, dignity, and we can eat from the land.
Well, look what young black South Africans, of course, considering Katabaya land and expropriation, and I think it's quite interesting. They're very much involved. They're voicing out their opinions. They're voicing out, what things needs to happen, and this is, of course, the South African youth taking charge. 011 339 1315 and be a part of the youth that are taking charge. And Spiwe, of course, all the way from Tembisa. Again, Spiwe, ra amogela mo Daily Thetha.
Hello, guys. Yeah, I think it's Spiwe from Tembisa.
Yes, Spiwe.
Yeah, I'm very fascinated about today's topic regarding Tabaya land. Now, I don't specifically think that we as black people we are and have the time to take back the land, because why? If you can just take a practical example, there are times whereby maybe our local municipalities have built parks for us and for young children to play. But then again, if you can check, those parks, like, they are demolished now, and they are not in good shape, and you will never even have that interest of playing there. Okay, then, hence I'm saying that we are not ready. Now they are compensating money for the land. Instead of us to take the land and use it for a good use, then what we do is to take the money. Even now, if you can check along our communities, you can never find a young person engaged or herself in agriculture. It's only old people of which they don't have any much power to continue farming. And then as young people, we do like amateurs and IT and so forth. It's very rare to find a young person to do agriculture. So for us to, so for us to be in a position whereby we take the land, because it depends on us young people. So I don't think we are ready. Yeah.
That's a very interesting point. We drank example. The way we tlhokomelang di park tsa rena should show gore re na mara re tla bolela diphannes tsa rena ka yona taba. Thanks for your call, Spiwe.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, Spiwe raise my points about but I think the issue of young people not actually, not all of them are not farming sector. I know in KZN as well, there are a couple of guys who even have their own union led by Thetha Mapun Mkhize, yes, who's one on a farm in Kempatown. So I've seen abantu abamnyama, especially the youth.
We've also seen the technology meeting agriculture with the gentleman Tumelo, the stock exchange, so you can basically buy one online and have an app for it. So I think young people are trying. It's just that maybe not most stories are told. I don't know.
Let me go to KZN and see if someone can actually angvumele le nto engishoyo as well. Zathembe.
Yebo.
Kunjani baba?
Ngiyaphila.
Asikhona mfethu sikhuluma about the land issue namhlanje. Uthini umbono wakho wena?
Into engibukayo mina la wena Kini inkinga ekhona thina abantu abamnyama nje bese shilo mdela uphuma ukuthi thina iyouth kakhulu asikade ready yazi mina engibone ngathi mhlawumbe ngayisisombululo kulokho akusizi ukuthi sithathe umhlaba kwaba uphethe sibe singeke usebenzise uzophila uhlala ngoba ekugcineni mangathiwa basinika amaplaza lawa abawaphethe ngoba ikakhulukazi baphethe amaplaza leKZN abathatha umhlaba mase abasinika wona singasizohle ukwamanage khona enye into eyenziwa umunye umlungu uthi angisazi ukuthi lithi plaza la ethathe khona ehlukanise khona abasebenzi bakhe obanika amaphesenti athile nawasala amaphesenti athile mina bengajabulela mhlawumbe mangase uhulumeni afake loyo mbono loyo kulabo bophethe umhlaba ukuthi kulungileke ake sithi 50% ke niyawuthatha usala kahle nama sekuthi 50% kubo awabantu baleyo ndawo nawo bakwazi ukuthi bahlomule abafundise lowo mlungu sobephethe iplaza ukuthi sirana kanjani ibhizinisi lokufama lokho kungenza ukuthi umnotho wethu ungashoni phansi njengoba umnotho wethu uqhubeka uyehla nje.
Siyabonga kakhulu Zethemba usuyihlaba esikhonkosini mfethu ukuthi instead of ukuthi abantu bathatha ama-farm banikezwe ama-percentage kulelo farm vela abasebenza kulona abanye babo ne. Thank you siyabonga mfethu.
Thank you Zethemba. Well arkweng gore di-panelists tša bona ba naganang of course ka topic ya lekgono re na le of course Morris Mokobe Masutho wa re jonang lekgono le yena Zola Valashia ba leng gore ba tlo re botša mo about your opinions. Gentlemen, welcome to Daily Thetha.
Thank you very much.
I mean, Spiwe is our first caller. Are Mokobe, let's take a look at, you know, the Dabazadi parks. We can't take care of them. When they give us something, we damage it.
Yeah.
So therefore, we are not ready. Are we ready, Rona, as, you know, Black South Africans to occupy land and make something out of it?
Well, maybe we need to take a step back
Right.
to say, when was the land taken and how? 1881, there was a conference called the Scramble for Africa, where European countries, white boys basically, sat around and say, you take South Africa, you take Nigeria, and you take Zimbabwe. And they assessed that land to see what is rich in that land. When people talk about taking back the land, we're not talking about agricultural purposes. That's one of many functions. We're talking about the gold. In fact, 100 companies based in London, in the UK, own over $1 trillion worth of minerals in Africa. That is 13,000, let's say 13 trillion South African rands in South African money. That is 10 times more than what SARS collects in 1 year. Now, so the debate for land can be reduced to agricultural purposes or parks. Now, and many people will be quick to say, don't take the land, you will fail like Zimbabwe. No.
Yeah.
Actually, small-scale tobacco farmers in Zimbabwe have begun to produce more tobacco than white farmers were producing without the support that white farmers had. That's number one. But number two, as soon as Zimbabwe took a bold step to say Lancaster Agreement, we agreed that when it ends, you give us back our land. Tony Blair says, I can't give you back your land anymore. Zimbabwe failed because its failure was engineered. How was it engineered? America and the US, America and Europe decided to sanction Zimbabwe. What sanction basically means that if this farm was producing 10 tons of maize and it was being bought in Europe, Zimbabwean maize can't be sold in Europe anymore, so you can't grow. So they will show you that this farm has failed. But actually this farm has been sanctioned, just like much of the Zimbabwean economy. So yes, I mean, I don't think we should confuse this few, if there are parks that need to be maintained, yes, the state must maintain. But the land, the discussion about land is a lot more serious, is because it's about, we have a clear history. Another problem in South Africa is that the expropriation of land now can only be done up until 1913, which is when the Land Act came into place. But by that time, vast amounts of land had already been taken. That's why the president is saying, actually, let's move back the date of when our land must be taken back. Back to 1652, if you like, when Jan van Riebeeck arrived here. Because if you start doing that, then you are not limited by legislative impediments that are protected by the Constitution. So when people say the Constitution is a stumbling block, the Constitution is not a stumbling block, because the Constitution can be changed through Parliament. So that's why I support all political parties in South Africa must come together and put together their 2/3 majority and change the Constitution to allow expropriation of land without compensation.
That's a good point. I think we need to come back to it.
Exactly, but let's bring Uzola into this as well. Do you agree now, Uzola, on what you just said right now?
Not entirely. I don't agree with fracturing the mechanism that's without compensation. And it's important that this clause is there because it's general protection. So if we think we can just affect the white owners of land, what makes you think when you have your land, the same expropriation clause won't happen to you for various reasons? So it's quite important that the compensation clause is there because it's also fair to give fair value for it. Now, we must be quite clear what expropriation means. It doesn't mean we're negotiating on whether to buy your land or not. That's not what it means. We have foregone the conclusion that your land is about to be dispossessed. The only thing we need to negotiate and talk about now is how much value you get for it. How much should we pay? That's where the real definition is. That's where most court battles are. And that's where the greatest confusion around it is. So it's not true to say that if we expropriate land, all of a sudden we're going to turn into Zimbabwe. That's not the case. But what we must consider as well that land has become a lot more sophisticated now. It's a lot more delicate in how we treat it, especially because it is the substrate on which a lot of capital and infrastructure is upon. So we must be clear in thinking that if we're going to take this land, we must also be able to see what are the economic consequences down the line, lest we get ourselves further into junk status.
Right.
Let's clarify something here,
Yeah,
very
I
important.
want to ask you as well.
Number one, I don't believe in individuals owning land. No black, no white must own the land. The state must be the full custodian of the land. By the way, the farmer who owns the farm does not work that farm. It is farm workers, our mothers and fathers who work that land. He only runs the books and collects the money at the end of the year. So really, to say that don't take back the land because it will suffer, we're not taking back the land. We're just saying the money must not go to one man. It must go to everybody who is farming the land. That's one thing. He's talking about junk status. Nobody above the age of 10 must be allowed to take rating agencies serious. These are the same people who rated the subprime mortgage in America, AAA rating, which is the best rating, 2 weeks before they collapsed and took the whole world with them. In fact, all rating agencies, Moody's, Fitch, and Standard & Poor, have been found guilty and have confessed that they manipulate the ratings for money and for political influence. That is why, since we've been rated junk, more money has come to South Africa, because more and more investors don't take these bogus structures serious. Let us not be intimidated by pseudo-intellectuals such as Moody's, who are telling us that we will go down the Zimbabwe route. In fact, Zimbabweans have their dignity with them, even though their land is not as productive as it was if they would have been sanctioned. So I don't take rating agents seriously, and indeed we must change the constitution, because it is us who wrote it. Political parties must take their differences aside and say, if we're serious about the land, I like the EFF's offer to the ANC.
So it shouldn't be about individuals. It should be about...
No person was born with the land. Why an individual must own the land? The land must be owned by those who work it. The mine owners, the mine workers must own what comes out of the ground. Not some white person who owns the mine, which is not his.
Let's go for an ad break. Interesting views, very interesting views that John from Mokobe, of course, Lizola, Arin Papa Jonge, we still continue with our debate. And it's very easy to say, government must do this, we must do that, but how do we come to a very practical solution? You're watching Daily Thetha, we'll be right back.
Saturday night with Daily Thetha on SABC 1, hashtag being you with one, scream about the land issue. And it's katesning must scream about the land. Hleze kube nalokho kusabisana kakhulu kazi ngento eyenzeka eZimbabwe ukuthi if nathi sifuna ukuthathela umthetho ngezandla or abantu betholela amaplaza wabo kuzoba nenkinga ukuthi bazohleka kwa maintainer as well. But sithola enye view as well. We want to find out from someone from Zimbabwe zolezo besichazela kabantu ukuthi is it true, is it not? But right now let's go back to AKZN. Siyothola uStumo. Stumo. Stumo. Usikhona unjani futhi?
Hayi ngiyaphila la.
Isikhona khuluma nathi.
Bese ngizoqala la nje ngithi nje uphuthume ngalesi ngithi mfethu ngifuna siyazi okokuqala umhlaba wabamnyama kuyaziwa ukuthi bakwafatwa balapho, right? Okay, akudlule lapho. Okunye uyingozi kakhulu umnjani umlungu omnyama. Okay, sharp. Awuzimbabwe kwethu indlela ezangathi ngithatha umhlaba kuhlukile zokumele senze kahle sibeyinteningi ekelezile bese eshayeni zonke into zamakhosi labantu bona ufuna bathathe bayosebenza lapha ya kwemafamu kubibona abazokwazi ukuthi bayise i-economy yethu ivalero umhlaba wathatha ngolaka right thina sosobe umkhondo suthathe umkhondo njengoba sesiningi into engaka abamadema lefisi ukuthi ngizoludla ukuphuma ukithu iningi imali yale South Africa iphuma abantu abavota njengo-open hand badayisa ama-amadema manje something leyo mali engabe siziyouth sokwazi ukufundisa nje bakuthiwa
Okay. Stumo siyathanda kakhulu ukukhuluma nawe mfowethu but uline wakho awukho kahle so wabli uzwakalela phansi ngathi usemkhosheni angazi kwenze njani kodwa ke siyawuthola umbono wakho as well ukuthi going forward asimele sense ukuhlakanipha singathathi izinto ngodli sithatha ngokuhlakanipha ne. Thank you siyabonga.
Thank you, Tumo. Thank you so much, Tumo. Well, let's just take a look at what's happening on social media before we introduce our next guest. Something very interesting. More Facebook. Ke Isaac Quinton Ramaphala are. The sad reality is that the only place where blacks are guaranteed a portion of land is the graveyard. Very sad. Even
the corner is not guaranteed right now because you find utamanyama graveyards abanye sebengcwaba phekwe ihlobo zabo because space asekho.
That bad.
So it's not really guaranteed.
Yes, like Mighty Jamie, that's how unfortunately we introduce you, my dear. There's a saying, blacks are only guaranteed land graveyarding. We hear that's actually not the case. And what's going on? And especially also because this comparison between South Africa being the aspirant Zimbabwe because banality aspirations to grab their land back. What do you think about those comparisons?
I think land is an emotional issue. And everybody wants to take back the land, and there's conversations about, the only land you'll ever get is your grave. These are emotive conversations. And in the late 70s, this is exactly the conversations which used to happen in Zimbabwe. People used to say, no, we're going to take the land without compensation. Eventually, it was done. Yeah. And it did contribute to the collapse.
Was it an easy transition?
It's in the early 80s, there was a moratorium placed on any forms of expropriation without compensation. Okay. There was an agreement at Lancaster House where all of the parties, Zanla and ZAPU and Mugabe's party, which was the Patriotic Front at the time, when they went to Lancaster House, it eventually merged with ZANU-PF, with ZANU to make ZANU-PF. They agreed that between 1980 and 1990, there wouldn't be any radical steps taken with land reform. What they agreed to was a willing buyer, willing seller model. Okay. In the 90s, what then happened was a shift away from willing buyer, willing seller to more aggressive expropriation. Okay. So what then began to happen is that the first people to take the land and to benefit from it were the ZANU-PF bigwigs. And what then happened is that there was loss of support from the international community. Because people were saying, you said you want to take back this land, you have a moral claim. A lot of people don't contest the moral claim to land. We should get the land, this is our land. A lot of people agree with that. But in the early 90s, most of the people who were benefiting from the land were ZANU-PF bigwigs. So that's where the ZANU-PF started getting question marks around, are you really doing land reform for the people or are you doing it for yourself? Gotcha. And then late in the 90s, the military war veterans started saying, no, we've been waiting for very long, we're going to take this land. So in 2000, between 2000 and 2002, you started seeing people doing what the first guest who was on the screen was suggesting, taking the land outside of government. And then government then came in and tried to normalize those land seizures because people were being killed, land was taken by force. When that began, the Zimbabwean dollar, which was trading, I think it was stronger than the rand in the 90s, right? It lost 50% of its value as soon as the land grab started. Because, I mean, markets respond differently to this kind of behavior. Because what markets thought was, now there's no rule of law in Zimbabwe. People can just do whatever. So whatever discussion we're having about taking land, it must be through the state, it must be through law. We cannot go to a point where it's done haphazardly or by seizure. So I've seen that some people have been encouraging society to just go and take land and just occupy it haphazardly outside of the law. That's the first red flag. If you do that, it's a mistake.
What do you think when I'm argument here, Mighty Jim?
Well, I think Jamie is from Zimbabwe and he can speak intelligently about the dynamics of Zimbabwe. What he seems to be misinterpreting the truth, though, is that the Zimbabwean dollar was tanked because the international community lost sympathy with Zimbabwe. It's not true. And it's not even an international community, okay? It's a group of white men and women in Wall Street and London whose stocks are directly linked to what is beneath the Zimbabwean soil. So when they could no longer own the land, it means they can't own what's beneath the Zimbabwean soil. And that is what they were angry about. And that is why sanctions were imposed on Zimbabwe. It's not about crops. Crops that grow on the land are one of the many commodities from which those who colonized Zimbabwe benefited from. So yes, I don't encourage land grabs, but I must warn the state that Lancaster Agreement, it was not a willing buyer, willing seller regime. It had similarities with the South African willing buyer, willing seller, which both failed, by the way. However, when the Blair government, to our astounding shock, which was supposed to be a Labour government, came into power in Britain, it said, take your Lancaster Agreement and throw it away. We are not going to give back the land. That's when Zimbabweans said, oh, well, in that case, we will then take it by force. It was not like Zimbabweans woke up one day drunk and say, actually, we want to take this land by force. It was Blair's government's arrogance. And there's a saying that rather die on your feet than to live on your knees. And that's what Zimbabweans decided to do. And I much respect them to say they would rather die hungry but with their dignity intact than for us to continue to be ruled by white boys and white women, not even the entire white population.
We'd rather not die. Asifuni kufa ngendlala ngoba uMorris ufuna ukuthi sibe ne dignity.
No, it's not about hunger.
No. Because that's what you're saying.
Our mothers plant those food.
I'm going to deal with this skills question. Give me an opportunity.
Okay.
The reality is, and in Zimbabwe there's a saying which goes marimanzara, which means you have farmed hunger. And it's one of the popular musicians who coined this phrase in one of his songs. It resonates with a lot of people because a lot of this political rhetoric tries to dodge the questions that come about. So Morris, whether it was 10 people in the London Stock Exchange or in Wall Street who made the decision, the reality is the stock market collapsed because people were seeing farmers being killed, people were seeing land being grabbed.
So the reaction of the market.
The reaction of the market is something that we must consider. We mustn't take land in a way that will make people panic. People who have put money in South Africa, people who are benefiting currently, because this money is international. We don't control it. That's one. Number two, this idea of skills. Black people do work the land. We put the seed in the ground, we remove the weeds, we take the tea crops and the tobacco and we put it in packages. Black people do that. They know how to do that. But a farm is a business, right? And there are many factors to running a business which are outside putting the seed in the soil.
Like?
The procurement, logistics, human resources. It's a company like any other.
Let's go for an ad break. We're going to come back to this debate. Let's go for a quick ad break and pay our bills. We're trying to have Daily Thetha expropriated without compensation on SABC 1. So let's go for an ad break. And of course, our panelists, Mighty J. Mokobe, Morris Masuta, was a debate about, of course, land in South Africa. Bravo. Still watching Daily Thetha. SABC 1 land in South Africa and how exactly should go back to its rightful owners. The inhabitants, of course, of South Africa. Black South Africans, wealthier, it's in the minority of the country, and it's really not fair. We need radical economic transformation. But I think what's most important, key opinion, so make sure our phone in on 011 339 1315. And Lucky is on the line. Hi, Lucky. All right, Lucky. Ngiyaphila. Khuluma nami, please.
Yebo sisi wangu la ngibuya le Zimbabwe mina. Yes, lento le yomhlabathi, yes, siyavuma umhlabathi awuyele ebantwini abamnyama, but kukhona ungeke kuhambe kahle because ngoba umhlabathi siwuthethe ebalongweni. Uyabona manje nje silapha emsebenzini silethwe lokho ukuthi umhlabathi waphuma ebantwini abamhlophe wabuyela back ebantwini abamnyama. And then that thing has affect abamkhulu bethu abakwazi ukulima, abakwazi ukwenza lutho. Just nje amaplaza bajabulele lokho ukuthi umhlabathi siwuthethe black, but abakwazi ukusebenzisa.
So usho gore batho ba bantsho ba go shumisha di farmers because how ya di plasing ke bona batho ba bantsho ba lemang ke bo mma ba rona ke bo ntate ba rona ba lemang. Is it fair to say gore ba itse ulema?
Yebo ngiyakusho lokho ukuthi yithi sisebenza abantu abamnyama, but abantu abamnyama sisebenza ezikhashwe ngumlungu.
Otherwise
umlungu yona liyaplana ukuthi umuntu omnyama engathi akayenze so uyakwazi ukuyenza, but iplan iqhamuka phezulu emlungwini.
Yo. All right, thanks.
So like iyat affect kakhulu ngilana nje gole ngoba iproblem yokuthi asinamlungu alo on eplaza nomsebenzi uphelele because of ukuthi umhlabathi sawuthatha sijabulela lokho.
That's interesting, you know, like gore wa bua because kana le koketso ke yena a farmer. So ke batla utlwa from yena gore o nagana ka opinion ya ga. But thank you so much for your call, ne?
Okay.
Thanks, Lucky.
And enye into enginotice as well indaba yokuthi urun ifama ke khona ke, because not only ama farms esibheke kona but buka about the whole umhlaba nje wonke. But let's look at indaba ye farm as well. There's so many logistic akhona egrunning farm, not just ukulima kuphela, not just to do this kuphela, but yezo izinto zobe sibona kakhulu. Koketso njobe seshile uTumi Koketso Maloko, pig farmer as well. Wanna find out from you Koketso ukuthi abantu abaningi bakhala ukuthi abantu abamnyama bawathola ama-plus, yes, but bahluleke ukwarana, they end up badayisa back to abantu abamhlophe as well. What do you say about that? Is it something eyenzakalayo ngempela oyibonayo khona, or abantu nje bazikhulumela?
Yes, I mean, like na plus I go the northwest. Mari, you know, this land issue of the land emotional. And I think heavy approach, we must approach it in a way where there's a more balance. Now, from a farmer's perspective, I think people must be compensated, but not for the land. Like, I'll give you an example. My grandfather used to farm back in 1969. Then there were forced evictions. We come from a community, Rebagu. So we come from a community called Molote. So with these forced evictions, people's houses were demolished. My grandfather had a 10-bedroom house. It was demolished. Things were destroyed. So it's not to say that when this land was taken, there was no infrastructure there. There was infrastructure, which was demolished. So then the white farmers, for instance, came and built infrastructure, buildings and so on. So my thinking is that how government must approach this is compensate them for the structures that are on the property, not the land itself. So for instance, value the buildings and the tractors and the mechanization, you know, and all the implements that are there. Compensate for that, not the actual land, because the land was stolen. That's a fact. You know, and I mean, how we were able to, for our side, our community, identify land. The elders went and actually pointed out the burial places. In some instances, grave sites were desecrated, you know, when this happened. So, you know, that issue is a very emotional one, where as a result, some people end up having heart attacks. Imagine seeing your house demolished right in front of your eyes, and there's nothing you can do about that, simply because you are above, and as you, the previous speaker, Mukobe, was saying, you're above minerals. I mean, where we are, the land is mineral rich. It's rich in diamonds, it's rich in... So they knew it's an area called the Minch Triangle. You know, it's a very highly arable piece of land. You don't need to do much to the soil.
I'll get into your sector as well, because I know Mukobe also mentioned this is just beyond farming or agriculture. It's one of, but there's so many more things that we talk about land. Daddy Ama. When you hear Batwaba Tsobare, black people are not capable, I mean, how does that make you feel? And it's sort of like, it's almost as if we are setting up ourselves for failure or other countries. You feel as wrong as a farmer?
You see, they have a point, but they also don't have a point. I mean, I'm a young African female farmer, and I'm not one. I'm one of many. There's many of us in the sector. It's just it's one of those things that doesn't get highlighted. Similar thing with young African guys who are in the sector. It's a lot of youth are starting to go back to the land, and people are realizing, you know, that in life, you don't have to necessarily do a glamorous desk job. You do what makes you money. Farming is not glamorous. It's dirty.
Is that why we don't hear much about it in the media?
It's not a glamorous thing. I won't. You know, it's hard work. It's lots of work. I mean, when I plant my yellow maize, I wake up 5 a.m. I'm at the fields. 11 I'm back at the house. Yeah, so it's you working and you planting, you're racing against the clock, because I plant yellow maize. So, you know, planting season is typically a busy time for me, and I also breed pigs, I breed sheep as well. So you know, various people are in different things in agriculture. It's not just one thing. You know, there's many things in it.
All right.
Mari Jamie, you mentioned something, Thetha, the time when all this in Zimbabwe, abantu ababenefita kakhulu, ama politicians out of this. Are we not going to go into that route as well, whereby the ANC big wings and everybody, or the EFF or whoever, benefit kakhulu in terms of this land, more than just ordinary or people who are supposed to actually benefit from the land? Okay,
so I want to be fair. About 5% of this land ultimately went to politicians. Mugabe, there were reports done by human rights commissions and several other bodies, including the ANC. They determined that he owned 16 farms. And another fellow who was very close to Mugabe, Simon Muzenda, owned 15. So that's 31 farms between two individuals. That's too many farms, right? But to be fair, that's only about 4 to 6% that went to politicians. The real problem that came when the land was transferred, so let's skip the violence and the market falling, is that there were two forms of land reform. There was A1 for smallholders and A2 for commercial farms. Commercial farms were given to people without commercial farming skills. So people came into those farms and they only did subsistence farming. They were farming for themselves and their family and maybe their extended family. And they said, look, I don't care about all of these hectares. I am okay. My family is okay. This is now my land. That was a problem. Another problem was that because of the lack of support and training, a lot of the farms that were given, which were commercial, collapsed. So Morris actually gave incorrect statistics about tobacco, right? In 2000, Zimbabwe used to produce 242 million kilograms of tobacco. In 2008, the last time there was an accurate measure, it was producing 48 kilograms, millions of kilograms of tobacco, which is an 80% decline over 8 years in the production of tobacco. So when you take land, it's important that the right people get it. And looking at South Africa, I'll give you the statistics. You've got 1.2 million people who enter matric, right? Only about 200,000 people wrote agriculture as an exam for matric. Of the 200,000 people, only 20% got 70% and above, right? So when we're now talking about, are we actually equipping the young people who this topic of debate is about for actual farming? If only 20% of 200,000 are passing the exam with marks that are adequate, they have a basic understanding of agriculture, how many of those people are going to continue with the university qualification? Because we can't just have people getting land and farming without skills.
Mari James as well in the last segment, making sure that we're wrapping up everything, we're finding a solution about the topic the land issue with Daily Thetha on SABC1. Find us on Facebook now, Twitter as well, or phone 011-339-1315. So we'll be after this. Sahleli nathi ku-Daily Thetha on SABC1 sikhuluma about the land issues. Funa ukuza umbono wakho uthini about it, nanokuthi wena njengeNingizimu Afrika ucabanga ukuthi youth namhlanje i-ready na ukuthi when umhlaba ubuyela kubona bawusebenzise ngendlela okuyiyona yona. Sifonele osiza umbono wakho ma-guest wethu. We are about to wrap up the show. Dumi njengamanje. Zola, your last comment, brother man, about the topic namhlanje.
Can you just pass on the mic, please, to the gentleman?
Suzwile ama-guest wethu ekhuluma ebeka imbono yahlukahlukene. In closing nje.
In closing, it's quite clear that there are a lot of issues that are tied to land, and it's important that the work we put in is to try and see exactly where it can be impactful without compromising our legal system and ourselves. For example, we must be able to clarify that owning the land doesn't mean I own the minerals. So even if I do get the land, the mining companies that still can benefit from that still do. Even if I have a farm, that doesn't mean that the big companies are going to buy my products, right? So all these myths that we get from politics and unrefined public thinking need to be dispelled. So by the time we do decide to have action, strong action, we know exactly what we're going to do so we can get the best benefit out of it.
All right, thank you so much, Zola. And Mokobe, I want to come back to you because Mighty Jemu Wilo, you give wrong statistics. Number one, your statistics about the tobacco, mineral or business wasn't as accurate, but also you spoke about the Constitution earlier on and how, because the bill was written by the government, they need to go back and revisit it. And the ANC government also voted against the expropriation, of land. Just take us through your comments on that, please.
Well, you see, as for stats, I will reference a study done by Masvongo in 2013. So if Jamie wants to dispute the figures by this particular author, he must tell us who he's quoting. It's simple as that's how academic writing works. You reference the latest available publication, and Masvongo wrote the latest. But maybe just to clarify that what has been produced and what is bought are two different things. I spoke specifically of how Zimbabwean farmers and black farmers, to be more precise, have been stifled because of the sanctions. So people who could buy or sell what was being bought and sold in Zimbabwe can't do that because of sanctions. So in a sense, that's why Zimbabwe's economy, it's not that Zimbabwe can't produce what they used to produce. It was the same black farmers who were tilling the land, to be more precise. What has happened now is that they've been sanctioned, and that's why much of the tobacco in Zimbabwe today is being bought by China, because China has not sanctioned Zimbabwe. So it's basic economics on that one. But maybe on the second point there, it's simple. No individual, black or white, foreign multinational or local black-owned company must be able to own the land or minerals. And I said the land, the value of the land What I said is that the value of the land is not limited to the agricultural exercise you can perform on it, but the value of the land is about human settlement, it's about property rights, and it's about all the minerals beneath the soil. That's why the Freedom Charter says the land must be taken, including the minerals beneath that soil.
So quick one, was the ANC correct in voting against?
It was incorrect. If the EFF was bluffing, then the ANC must have called the EFF's bluff. But it was wrong for the ANC MPs to vote to shoot down that particular motion. That motion must have been taken through, and if the EFF was lying, then they would have been caught off guard. And I agree with the president that the EFF, the PAC, and the ANC, all black political parties that tell their constituencies that they want the land taken back, they must go back to parliament and pass that law so that the land can go back to its rightful owners.
That's Mokobe speaking. Matli on the line, Ra mo Daily Thetha. Hello, Matli. Matli, show ya fela. Wokas nor hello. Ke mo ka show ifedile. All right, seems like we've just lost you right there. Mighty Jamie, your comment, please.
Can I just come in before he comments? I mean, from a farmer's perspective, I think I agree to an extent with what Mokobe is saying, but I think that the biggest problem is that with us, we fail to implement planning, and we fail to plan and execute our plans. Because right now, let's say, for instance, Mighty Jamie mentioned to say that the crop production in Zim went down. That's due to a variety of factors that Mokobe is also highlighting to say. Things like mechanization. Let's take, for instance, Africa is a very arable continent in its entirety, but we don't even have, till today, 2017, one African tractor. How is that? So, for instance, if I decide now to go against the West and expropriate land without compensation and take land from Americans and the UK, all the implements for farming and production, most of the majority of them, Massey Ferguson, all the tractors, John Deere, all those tractors come from those markets. So what will then happen, as Mokobe said, you'll be sanctioned, and then if your tractor breaks, for instance, on the farm, which it always happens, you need a part. You won't get a part because of sanctions. And as a result, production goes down because our production is mechanized. We need implements to be able to plant and cultivate food and bring about food. So it's a series of things. So the thing is that what I'm saying is that expropriation is good and everything. And as the gentleman earlier on said, let's actually, if we want to expropriate properly, let's think about this thing and actually consider things like starting from the bottom, developing our own implements, putting more money into research and development so that we're not reliant on foreign tractors and foreign implements to cultivate our own land.
Thank you so much.
Because of this cut, Mighty, in short, what would you say in closing?
I want to say everybody thinks that something won't happen to them. The most desired document in Zimbabwe is a passport, because everyone is running away from Zimbabwe. And we need to be very careful about just saying we're not going to be like Zimbabwe when there are clear patterns that caused a Zimbabwean crash. And that's why there are so many Zimbabweans in South Africa right now, because the land reform was done poorly and people went hungry.
Sibonga kakhulu nakuyihambeli zethu sibonga bukhona zwani nabozona nokuthi nibe nani njengamanje sithele sesiyagoqa ke siyabuya njalo ngomsombuluko kuze koshaya uLesine iDaily Thetha on SABC 1. Siyabonga kakhulu ukuthi ube nathi namhlanje.
Thank you so much for joining us. Kwana mo Daily Thetha of course we had a very interesting topic. Keep it going on social media #Daily Thetha. Engage your fellow South Africans. Le bona gore lena as ba swa le bona ka re ke eng e swanetseng go tlhaga. Ba fela ka re tlo le bona go sasa same time same place gona mo SABC 1. Until tomorrow, it's goodbye.